Diana Sanchez, the Director of Communications here at National Marriage Week. National Marriage Week launches every February 7th through the 14th, and it's a fun time of events all across our nation. But it's also a movement that is growing all year long, when we're ministry leaders, churches, those in our government, and even us as couples are coming together to stand up and say we value our marriages. Our families and our country can flourish when the marriages within our homes are strong and healthy. So, we are so glad that you wanted to join us this evening and that you want to be intentional about growing individually and in your marriage. Each of our panelists is freely giving of their time to be here for you this evening to serve you in your marriage. Whether your marriage is struggling or in a really good spot, we are here to help arm you with the skills to make it even better. We are cheering you on. So let's get started.
Hello, viewers. I'm so happy you've joined our National Marriage Week panel discussion tonight. I'm Amy Morgan, your host for this evening, and I am just delighted to introduce you to our distinguished guests. Amy Gilford is the Executive Director of the Marriage and Relationship Education Center and the Maryland Marriage Initiative. She's been active in the marriage education movement for 2 decades and collaborates with community partners to help multiply the number of healthy marriages and families in Central Maryland. Amy, thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Glad to join everyone.
And Scott Kedersha has been married to his wife, Kristen, for 23 years. Scott is the marriage pastor at Harris Creek Baptist Church in Waco, Texas. Before that, he served on the marriage ministry staff at Watermark. He's written 2 books on marriage and co-hosts the More Than Roommates marriage podcast. Scott, thanks for being here.
So good to be here. Thanks for letting me be a part of it.
Michael and Julie Johnson are the co-founders of Future Marriage University. Since 2003, they've been having a blast sharing practical biblical truth about sex, dating, and relationships. They are empowering future generations to grow spiritually and date wisely so they can marry well. They've been married for more than 30 years and have 5 adult children. Thank you, Julie and MJ.
Great to be here.
Well, we are just all very excited to hear what you have to say. 2 very distinct lives collide when spouses merge together as one. Understanding how your family of origin impacted each of you and learning how to negotiate the differences will help you create your own unique family. A healthy married couple who is steadfast and unwavering in their love and commitment can leave a marriage legacy for their future children and grandchildren. All of our panel guests today have decades of experience helping people have healthy relationships. Scott, will you get us started? How do families of origin play a role in a new couple's life?
Yeah, wow. It is so much of a bigger blessing and challenge than we probably realize at times. The home we grow up in affects everything about our lives, the way that we think, the way that we act, our views on pretty much everything in life, like our views on money and relationships and conflict and pets and family. I mean, it affects our family of origin, really does affect really all of our life. And I think even in a way we probably don't even realize, because the home we grew up in, we think is normal. So, my dad passed away when I was 6 years old. My mom remarried. And so I grew up in a step family. And so much of what my normal is not the nuclear family. My wife grew up in a home where mom and dad had been married for over 50 years. My father-in-law is a military guy. And so they had a very different household than my home growing up. And so we expect when we come into marriage, so much of what we believe about our marriage and the future largely is guided by what we grew up with, because we kind of think it's normal. And the bottom line is none of us are normal. Like we think we're normal, but we're really not. And so that's the headline, is to realize we all come into marriage and to our new family with more dysfunction and more weird beliefs and more challenges than we probably even can admit.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. And Amy, you had mentioned that families marry families.
Yes.
Can you help us share some of
all
that?
that weirdness Scott just talked about, it all comes in together with you, whether you want it to or not. So all those attitudes, the actions, the modeling, the lack of modeling, they all imprint on us. And we carry that into our new relationships. So the more unhealthy the home that you grew up in, the more intentional you need to be in developing those new relationships and thinking about forming your new family. Because as I tell my students in the school, you can't choose where you came from, but you can choose where you're going moving forward. And so you can use your future family as an opportunity to break cycles, create new patterns and traditions, and have opportunities to build on what you've learned that maybe didn't go so well when you were growing up, but you can change the narrative for your future family.
Oh, that's so hopeful. I know, MJ, you said the way you learned how to relate is how you're going to relate in your marriage and you won't be different. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, you have to intentionally decide that you're going to change some of those patterns. And one of the things you really need to intentionally decide is that you're going to forgive your parents and family of origin. I've talked fairly recently with a young man that came probably from a family like a lot like our kids came from, Christian family with parents that made mistakes. And he just had the "you failed me" conversation with his parents.
Wow.
And
Well,
I did relate to him on that. Yeah, well, I'm sorry that happened. I'm sorry that happened. But we're trying our best. And that said, if you're relating to what I just said, watching this, you cannot move forward without dealing with those family of origin issues that hurt you, and accepting that, and yet then being able to forgive them is so important.
Yeah, we talk about with our students that come through our classes about really how suppression leads to obsession. A lot of times we think, well, I want my family to be different. I want my marriage to be different. So then we just want to plow forward with that new plan. But like, as Michael was talking with this young adult, if you want to do that, you really have to learn to face those things that you want to change instead of just trying to bury them down and move forward without looking at them.
We talk about, instead of suppression, supplant. So instead of just like, oh, I'm going to forgive that, I'm going to push it away. No, dig up that thought. Scripture calls it taking your thoughts captive. And you dig up that feeling, you dig up that experience, you analyze it, and then you set it aside and plant other things in that place, other truths, new habits. And then, I remember that hurt, but I forgave that. And that can't be changed. But what can change is I can forgive, I can move forward. So supplant instead of suppress.
Yeah, that is such wise counsel. And learning how to do that. And I think all of us are at the stage where our kids, we may have adult kids. And oh man, when you said that, my head just went down thinking about how being that parent and hearing those things from adult children. And because you're right, you wanted to do your best, but a couple needs to appropriately separate and start their new family. And I'm even thinking about my adult sons and how that is right. That they need to do that. How can they do that, MJ?
Well, again, I'm going to go to scripture again. The order is leave and then cleave.
Yeah.
It is not what a lot of people are doing today, which is cleaving, actually moving in together and everything like that. And they've never really worked through and separated themselves from, again, we're not talking about pushing or suppressing the past, but never really dealt with their past so that then they can move forward into the future. You have to have that healthy separation from your parents first if you're going to be able to engage in a healthy way in marriage.
Yeah. And you kind of talked about being emotionally involved with your parents.
Yeah. And that's issues too. That part of it is forgiveness and part of it is just, man, I was really connected to my mom. And I realized counselors might have said that we were enmeshed. And it was a few years into our marriage where I finally had to have a conversation with my mom where I'm like, yeah, I can't be this confident to you anymore.
Graciously.
And again, that just shows you too, that if you're watching, you're like, oh, I got to be perfect. Well, no, we weren't. None of us in this thing were perfect. We got married. But I would urge you to do that kind of, separation sooner rather than later, because it was painful for my mom, that conversation.
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh. And Amy, I know you work with a lot of people at the MREC about dedicated conversations, about kind of coming up with some of these separation, how you do that leaving before you can cleave. Let's talk about that, because you have some great training there.
Well, and I think it's so important, as MJ was just saying, with people deciding to cohabitate rather than form distinct new units, the conversations get blurred so easily, and you might just kick a lot of those cans down the road and overlook some of those important conversations and just never have them. But you've got to talk about money. Kids, are we going to have them? What if we can't have them? That's especially an issue in this generation if we're paying attention to the news. How are we going to handle holidays? All these are key topics that will really cause fireworks in a relationship if we're just sort of muddled, everything is mixed up all together, and we don't have a distinct relationship that we're trying to form and establish as we continue to deal with our in-laws. And we don't want them to be outlaws, but if we don't have these important conversations, we're setting ourselves up for conflict for you. So conversations early in a relationship, what's the goal? What do you want? And what works best for us, not just you or me, but for us together. Deciding, making some decisions, and then sticking to your decisions, because you're going to get pressure to change your mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that just came to mind thinking as we're talking about couples planning and being intentional with these conversations is the value of premarital counseling. And how those are some of the things that you really work through. And then two, you may have different ways of doing things. I know, Julie, you had talked about that. Of, what this is this way and this is this way. What happened?
Yeah, I can't remember if it was in premarital counseling or something that we did. I think it was later a like conference or something that we went to. And one of the things they said, it's not wrong, it's just different, just different, not wrong. And that phrase just stuck in my head because that's part of the adventure of marriage, is really deeply getting to know another person. And you come to those places where you're just like, I don't understand. This just doesn't make sense. But learning that just different doesn't necessarily mean wrong, and how to be able to accept each other for the differences that you innately have or that you come with your different families. But then, as Amy was saying, to form something new. So it's not an accusing or trying to figure out, well, my way is better or his way is better. No, it's just, which way do we want to choose out of the two things?
Well, and I love that you bring that back to, like, let's make an us. I know, Scott, you had some, as you've worked with so many couples and premarital work and work at your church, you had some really good words of wisdom as you come up with that new plan for the us.
Yeah. It's so good. I love what you said, Julie, that it's not wrong. It's just different, because there's so many times when, candidly, when I thought my way was right and Kristen's was wrong. And that's not the case, and so specifically on holidays, if there's more than three options, but we either go to her house, her parents' house, we go to my family's home, or we stay home. And my strong preference is to stay home. I want to be, I work really hard up to the holidays with working at church and Christmas Eve. And it's a busy time, and I just want to chill at home with our family, do our own thing, our own traditions. Kristen grew up in a home where her family growing up always went to grandma's house. And so when we got married, the assumption on her part was that we would always go to her family's house. And there might be times when she'd throw me a bone, we'd go to my family, but most of the time we'd go to her family's home because that's what she grew up with. And neither one of those are right or wrong. There's pros and cons to both. And so we've got to fight for unity in those decisions, to be on the same page, to maybe lay aside, Philippians 2, 3, and 4, that we're going to do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility, we're going to count others more than significant than ourselves. And so Maybe my preference is to stay home, but what an easy and joyful way that I get to serve Kristen. And, and there might be years when she'd say, I would love to go to my family, but let's stay home. Let's build our own traditions as a family. And so it's really this constant dialogue of how can we yield to one another? How can we show preference to the other, put their needs before our own? And then the other really important piece is that we want to speak with one voice. And so I've seen this so many times in couples where they've gotten in trouble where, maybe the wife says to her family, hey, I really want to come home for Christmas, but my husband doesn't. And so like that doesn't go well for anyone. And so I wish I was making it up, but it's happened. And so like a really good principle that I found to be helpful is if you're going to deliver bad news, make it, have it come from the biological child. And so, hey, Mom, we made the decision as a family, we're going to stay here. We're not going to go home. And if it's good news, have it come from your spouse. And so, hey, like I would tell Kristen's parents, hey, we can't wait to come see you for Christmas. That earns me some favor with her family, and that's never a bad thing. And then we always use we language. It's never, I want to, but it's like, hey, we made the decision as a family because we are one flesh with each other. This is the decision that we're going to make with one another.
I love that idea. I was just with my in-laws last week, and that is really helpful to think. And you do when you get to say, as the in-law, we are doing this for whatever, you do earn favor, and it is a good thing. I think that's just a really simple little tip that really has great staying power. You also said sometimes it's not just where to spend the holidays, but how to spend the holidays and the expectations of gifts and, how to spend on those and how to accept the gifts.
Man, I wish I had like profound wisdom on this and said that we've crushed it. And it's a challenge, but like a couple thoughts here. One is you can't make a decision on which family to go see, his or hers, or let's say there's multiple step families. You can't decide which family to go to based on who gives the best gifts. That would be a really wrong way to make that decision.
Sounds good to me.
Same, but I don't want that to be the case, right? And so sometimes you make the decision based on where's the best ministry opportunity. So if you come from a non-believing family, maybe the best decision would be to go spend your holidays with somebody who doesn't know Jesus. And I think we often choose based on comfort, based on preference, based on who gives the better gifts. And then you've got to, as a couple, make that decision of how are we going to think as a team again. And there's no other way around it. Amy talked about it. MJ and Julie talked about it already. We've got to communicate about these decisions. It doesn't just like happen magically. And so there's no quick solution other than to communicate about decisions we make, how much money we're going to spend, and then where we're going to spend the holidays.
Yeah, that's a big one. MJ, where do couples get tripped up?
Well, as we're talking about all this stuff, I think about the couple that comes to me and they say, we've never had any argument. And I'm like, oh, that is so beautiful. You are not ready for marriage. Yeah, because, conflict is a normal, unless, yes, I know they're perfect when you're in limerence, but not when you're in reality. And so just accepting that conflict is normal. It is always easier to get along with people you're not living with. Yeah. And again, I may be talking to a couple that is living together right now, but you aren't committed yet. And so there's just something different when, oh my goodness, it's she and me. We have promised to be together for the rest of our lives. And she just said that. And so really learning that conflict's normal. You got to figure out how to work through it.
What is the myth of the soulmate?
Oh, well, that's the idea that, if you find the right person, then you won't have conflict. And in fact, they're just custom made for you. And in fact, so many people get married believing that they've married somebody like that. And then later they find out, oh, that there are differences. Whereas, the Gottmans talk a lot about the growth mentality instead of this soulmate idea. And the growth mentality is, I'm going to get married to her and she's going to ask me to change. And sometimes it's actually going to be for my best. And so I'm going to do that. I'm going to figure out how okay, yeah, she's right.
Grow.
I do need to start exercising, which I
He
did.
did.
I did finally in my 30s.
Woo!
But not because she badgered me or anything like that, but
No.
really she set this example. And then I let her example influence me when my body started shutting down in my 30s. And I started. So, I mean, just having that growth mentality that when you get to that conflict, it doesn't mean you married the wrong one.
Right.
Well, we're all the wrong one.
There's no perfect person.
Yeah,
that
so-
you're going to perfectly match to and have no conflict.
Except for us.
Yeah.
I have been perfect for her.
Just don't talk to our kids.
They're not going to watch this, are they?
I don't know.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Scott, you talk about, ways to break some cycles.
Yeah. Yeah, MJ, on that soulmate myth, I've actually heard this before, and now I'll talk about breaking cycles. That it actually, I've heard it comes from Greek mythology that has this idea that there's that each person is broken into two parts or broken in half, and you have to find the one person on the planet
Mhm.
that completes you. And it's such a false idea,
Mhm.
that out of the 4 billion people of the opposite sex, that I've got to find the one person who I fit together with perfectly, which is it's a crazy belief.
No
And it sets us
pressure.
up for- yeah, no pressure. You better find the one. But on breaking cycles, I think about we're not destined to repeat the things that we saw growing up. And so I grew up in a home where this is just a real tangible example is there was a lot of drinking at the holidays. And this is not a diatribe on whether you drink or not. I think there appears to be freedom to drink within moderation, but in my family growing up, we did not drink to moderation. And every holiday, it was like a drunk fest. And that's what I did in my pre-Jesus days, even underage drinking, and I'd get loaded on the holidays. And for a while, that's what I assumed the holidays were. Even as a new follower of Christ, it's like this is the time when everyone just drinks a lot, and then we know what happens when we drink to excess. That's when the fights start and the craziness starts and the language and it just isn't enjoyable. And so think about there's a million other examples of what it could look like in our home, and we often think that we're destined to repeat those cycles in our new family. And the good thing as a follower of Christ, think about 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he or she is a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. And we are not destined to repeat the same things that we saw growing up. And as a new family, we get to form our own traditions. And so instead of getting drunk, we're gonna have a ton of fun. We're gonna play games. We're gonna feast. We're gonna watch sports. We're gonna watch fun movies. We can start new traditions in our own family instead of repeating what we thought was normal growing up, especially if it's sinful behavior. We don't want to bring that into our new marriage and new family.
Hey, I'm sorry. I just want to interject too, because I was thinking this when I was saying things are not wrong, just different. And I thought, sometimes our traditions that we bring into marriage can be wrong.
That's good.
They can be toxic. They can be hurtful or unhealthy. And that's where we need to be gentle with each other. But yeah, we need to bring those to light, because that would be an example of one that was
Not okay.
You felt was wrong. I think a lot of people would feel was wrong or unhealthy, and we do want to change it. So just a little note.
Yeah, no, that was, and too, MJ, you talk about a little bit about like the normal and what is normal feels safe, or because that's your normal. And,
Yeah.
and you even had a really good example from the foster care world.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. When we were in foster care adopting our youngest two sons, they tried to explain to us, hey, if the kid that's coming into your house has generally gotten their meals out of the trash can, that is normal for them and therefore feels safe. and sitting at a table with a fork and knife feels unsafe. If they slept on the floor, that feels safe. And you want them to sleep in a bed with a pillow and sheets and a blanket, that feels unsafe. And so again, we're not foster care kids getting married necessarily, but the same things apply, that a lot of times, even in Scott's example, where it was normal for everybody to get a little or a lot sloshed, then that feels safe. And let's be real, if alcohol has been your avenue to actually being able to be open and honest and vulnerable, then it does feel safe. Whereas like, I'm going to share this secret and I don't have alcohol in me. Unsafe.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
That really is an interesting way to think about it. And I really, that idea of like the child wanting to sleep on the floor with a blanket, without a blanket, really resonated when we talked about that. Amy, what about people when they come into that marriage and they think they're going to think the same? But and those are things that you talk about with your people and your classes.
We do. And you mentioned that earlier. I think the lack of premarital preparation is not, preparing is not normed in our society. Just skipping over that because nobody's in love like we've ever been in love. We got this is the norm. And one time I approached somebody that I knew that was getting ready to get married for the third time. And he had been married twice. And so I was trying to coax her into our upcoming class. And she said, "Oh, we got this. This will be the 5th time for both of us. We got this." And I'm thinking, you don't got this. What you got is a cycle that's going to repeat itself again for a 6th time between you. If you don't slow down and get to know each other better and understand what marriage is really supposed to be about. But that person and many others just jump in thinking because we're so in love, we're going to automatically think the same about money. Although I'm a saver and he's a spender, we'll deal with that later, right? Family dinners, I think, is a big deal in this culture. We're returning to the value of that and as an important concept in culture more and more because people are realizing this is where you gain that family time, those values, those traditions, that how is your day? The communication is so valuable at dinner time. But if my family grew up with family dinner time and his grew up with the TV on, there's going to be conflict there on what that time is supposed to mean for the both of you. Blended families especially have this much more chaotic schedule than traditional families might have. So just assuming you're going to be able to figure it out without an intentional plan can cause a lot of conflict and confuse your children too, especially in a blended family, because they won't understand what the expectations are and they won't always know if they have freedom to speak or to share their opinions. In the family vision tree activity that we do in our classes, that's one of the things that students say that if they don't have it, they want to make sure they have it in their future family because they want to be able to connect with their parents. But there's no assumption on any of these things. Having those intentional conversations and that pre-marriage preparation, whether it be with a class or a mentor couple, those things are key to keeping it slow, pacing it, take time to understand if the addictions are there. You want time to see some of those things and not just wonder if they're there. You want time to experience them and really understand what could be a potential pitfall for your future family.
Yeah. Well, MJ and Julie, you've seen with the youth that you work with, what happens if a couple lacks good role models for their family of origin. What have you seen? You saw some patterns. You actually had some good stats.
Yeah, the stats are that still, for some reason, 95% of high school students expect to be married, not want to be married, think they might get married. They still expect marriage. And yet, 27% of 25 to 34-year-olds are married today, and only 17% of 18 to 24-year-olds are married today. So to answer your question, the lack of role models is clearly making many people balk at marriage altogether. And then the killer that I was just thinking of just today is that means then for that 27% of 25 to 34-year-olds that are married, that they have so few other couple friends to really compare notes with and be like, oh, we're normal. They're having that problem. Because 2 out of 3 of their friends aren't married. And so there's that isolating thing there. So I do that. I see that. I mean, that's not the only reason people aren't getting married anymore, but I think it is a huge reason because they just don't have those examples.
Those are some sad numbers.
Yeah.
Really tragic numbers.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing is that people fill in their perceptions of marriage with the examples they see around them. They see things on TikTok, Netflix, sports personalities, won't name any names, even Hallmark. But those aren't real. Those aren't realistic. But they can create false perceptions of what love is, what commitment is. And so that's why my recommendations, surround yourselves with those other healthy families in your church, in your community, in your rec leagues, volunteer someplace, tag along to people that seem to be getting along well. Seasoned adults who have been down the path ahead of us a little bit further are the best source of free wisdom and insight, life experiences that you can ever find. And usually older people are honored that a younger person wants to know, how do you do this? Like, how could you be together so long? That doesn't make any sense to me. I don't have that in my family. What makes it different for you guys? They love to ask questions. So mentor couple potentials, people that have been married a while, we all need to be that couple for this younger generation. We don't have to be uber smart, have all these titles and degrees. We just need to be real and relatable to these people so that they think they can do it, because we know they can. And we also know that marriage is worth it.
Well, and you do something really special at the MREC with your couples. Tell us about that, because I think that's very inspirational.
Are you talking about the anniversary?
Yes.
Okay. Well, as you know, car dealers usually send you postcards for your birthdays, right? We send you in this part of the world. So we're always getting a postcard. I'm like, buddy, I bought this car 8 years ago, and you're still saying happy birthday? But what are they doing? They're building relationships. They're building connections. And our goal is to, uphold the value of marriage. So every month, everybody who's registered for something at MRAC, we get their anniversary dates at the registration. It's a default on the registration form. And each month we send out 30 to 60, hundreds and thousands of postcards every year celebrating their marriage with them. And it goes through the post office. So, postcards, people pick up postcards, the mail carrier's reading postcards. We're honoring marriage. We're celebrating with them, and we're sharing to the community. This is important to us and has a ripple effect to everyone around you. And we have a sponsor in our community that pays for this for us. So we have a business community that believes in marriage too, and its impact on the culture and on our families. So it's a win for everybody because so many people get involved in this project.
Amy, I love that so much, the celebration of marriage. And likewise, I am so discouraged by the statistics you shared, MJ and Julie. And I think part of the problem is, with the younger generation is all they've heard about from people in our generation is how hard marriage is, how difficult it is, the challenges. And yes, there are challenges. There's one promise about marriage in the Bible: if you marry, you will have trouble. So we will struggle, but if that's all we lean on, it's no wonder they're moving in together. No wonder they're getting married. If all we talk about is the negative side of it, then why would anyone want to do that?
I agree with that, Scott. I mean, going to work is hard. Paying your bills is hard.
Yeah.
All those things are hard. Why does marriage get the headline? Well, this is really hard.
Yeah, and that
changed the narrative.
There's a good statistic that isn't it? We're going to use it in our Christmas campaign. It's 545%, right?
Yes.
Higher that marriage.
Brad
being,
Wilcox.
yeah, being in a marriage is 545% higher chance of being happy or something like
in a
that.
good marriage.
Yeah, being in a good, happy marriage.
Even being married gives you a higher
Gives
percentage
you
chance.
a higher percentage chance than being in a good career, having a good education. So, I mean, the potential with marriage is extremely high. So we need to focus on that.
Yep.
Oh yeah, well that's Brad in his study, his book, Get Married. He has some really great research-based evidence. And Julie, you had mentioned too that there was a lot of study about things that make marriage work.
Yeah, and I wasn't going to mention specifics, but I was just going to say what's different today. There has been so much research. Mike touched on, he said the Gottmans, and I thought they might not know. I mean, you can look up, Google the Gottman and their institute, but there's so much information on the internet out there and in counselors that have been studying marriage for years and that have all this information about what makes marriage work. But what's difficult is then you live in a community and in a culture, in a world that does not encourage commitment, that does not encourage marriage itself. So I think that's, where it really is a hard rub for young married people. And as we've been talking about, so to find those examples, to find those role models. And I just want to say as an encouragement too, even if you are not surrounded, you don't think there's a lot of people out there who are in the same boat, to do the work to find them. And an example I have it from our life is when we started homeschooling years ago, it was only 1% of the population that homeschooled. And so it was a small minority. I would say that's an even smaller minority than what percent are married. And yet I made it part of my job to find community for me and my kids, and really even for Michael, for our whole family, because we needed that support. I just felt like this is too big a job for me to do by myself. I'm not going to make it. I need help. I need encouragement. I really need my people. And so I found them. And even at times I made those groups, like in our neighborhood, I found the ones who were doing what I was doing and made time for coffee or made time for play dates. So you can do that with marriage. You just make the effort and find those people.
Yeah, I homeschooled for a year too, and I remember doing exactly that because I needed my people.
Yeah.
Now, Scott, you have a specific program at your church where you help with that. Let's talk about that because we were so encouraged by Amy's best practice there, but you've got a best practice in your church too.
We do. And I take this idea. We did this at Watermark Community Church where I was on staff for a long time, and we do it at Harris Creek as well, where we take 5 newly married couples, 4 to 6 newly married couples. We put them in a group together, and instead of the blind leading the blind, we put a married mentor couple over the group. Somebody who's, 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road. And there's so much, as newlyweds, I think you said this, Amy, that, or MJ or Julie, one of you said it, that when we get married, we think we're the only ones who are walking through something. But the reality is we all have struggles and challenges. And so being in a group with other newlyweds, walking through all of the challenges that come when you merge 2 lives together, it's typically money, sex, communication, decision-making, just understanding marriage. And so you get to learn from one another, and you get to learn from somebody who's further down the road. And the piece I love that we're very clear about is we always tell these newlyweds, you are going to learn from somebody who's not perfect, but you're going to learn from somebody who's a living example of what it looks like to pursue Jesus, to struggle, to thrive, to raise kids, to have a legacy. And just this idea that like we can learn from somebody who's enduring, persevering, in the midst of challenges, in the midst of the good and the bad. And so you get to learn in community, you address challenges that couples typically walk through. You realize you're not alone. You've got somebody to bear your burdens, to pray for you, to encourage you, to have fun with, to celebrate with. And so it's like one of the best forms of discipleship that I know. Because we're taking, we're married 23 years. We got 4 teenagers, 15 to 20-year-old boys. and we're getting to pour into other couples, and really, like, we want to be on mission together in our marriage. And I think so often we think, well, we struggle, we've had challenges. We want to learn from those things. And I think about 1 Corinthians 11:1. It says, follow me as I follow Christ. And the expectation, again, is not perfection, but it's to be able to say, I'm pursuing the Lord. Come alongside me as I learn from the good, learn from the bad, and realize that you're not alone. It's been like a marriage game changer, because we think that through these groups, and there's no way to really portray it statistically, but we believe we've probably spared at least one divorce in every one of these groups, because you're in community, you're learning from God's word, you're with others, and you're learning from somebody who's further down the road.
Wonderful.
I
Just
love
think
it.
of what
And
you-
if your church,
I was just thinking, when the couple, so the older couple that's mentoring that group, just think what it does for their marriage as well.
Oh.
It just strengthens them in a way that they wouldn't otherwise experience, except that they're working together to build into younger couples.
It's awesome.
Fantastic.
that's
Yeah,
the
if you
best
lead
thing.
others, you got to work on it. Like, I don't want to be a hypocrite when I lead, and so it's going to lead me to continue to work on my marriage as I seek to help others.
Now, MJ, not every church, unfortunately, has a great program like that, but maybe we're inspiring some people watching to start something like that. But MJ, you had an idea. If you don't have a church like that or a program, how do you can find those other mentor couples? Help our viewers think about that.
Again, you have to be intentional, and it is not going to be easy. Just like it's not easy to find the right person to marry. Maybe you ask a couple people that you think, hey, maybe they'll meet with us. No. You don't ask one couple and then you give up. Yes, some churches are like Scots. Most churches are not. And so, some couples don't even know what they have to offer. So I just encourage intentionality. Is there a favorite aunt or uncle that you've always looked up to, you've always been able to feel comfortable with? Ask them if they'll share, if you can share some of the things you're going through. I actually have. I call him my favorite in-law. He's this Uncle Craig that he is so wise. Yes, my father-in-law, by the way, if you're watching, I love you. But he would even say, yeah, go ask Uncle Craig. So, but again, Uncle Craig wasn't the first person that I asked. I looked
And you've
for help.
asked people and been turned down too.
Oh yeah. So you just gotta, again, it's worth the pursuit, even though it hurts, even to have somebody like, oh, well, yeah, they met with me once and then I fell off their map.
Or that you always have to call them.
Yeah, but you gotta do it.
But on the flip side too, there are a lot of people that are honored. I know my husband and I, we were asked to have a big role in our nephew's wedding. And I mean, that was so honoring. We put a lot of effort in it. We still, half the books that you guys write and whatever have found their way to them. And we still have that role. And so, don't be discouraged and don't be afraid to ask, I think too, because when you are the one asked, it does make you really, it solidifies your connection. But Scott, if couples didn't have that role model and they didn't learn the skills, how can they move forward?
Yeah. And reality is most individuals probably didn't grow up in a home where mom and dad have an amazing marriage, or they're even still married. And so I think it comes with a level of humility of admitting that we don't have this thing figured out. And, and in general, a posture of humility is going to work well for all of us. A friend of mine talks about, like, every day when you go into your closet to pick out what you're going to wear, like what shirt, what pants, what shoes. The other thing you grab is humility off one of the hangers, and you put that on every single day. It matches every outfit. It doesn't matter what the weather is. Just have this posture of humility that it's biblical. It's Colossians 3. It's that we're going to clothe ourselves with it. And like, one of the best examples I've seen of this are some really good friends. They're newlyweds. They have determined that they are going to be lifelong learners. And so they reached out before they got married. They met with 8 to 10 married couples, sat down with them with a journal and a set of questions, and they bought them coffee or lunch or breakfast or dinner. and just said, I want to pick your brain. I want to learn from you. Like, help us grow our marriage. And now that they're married, they still do that.
Oh,
And so there's a humility there, a desire to learn. They're really proactively working on their marriage before the problems even start. And then I want to have that in our marriage too. You know, First Peter 3:7 says, "Husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way."
Mm.
And that idea of understanding way is according to knowledge. That I'm going to be really intentional to continue to learn more about myself, about Kristen, about marriage. You know, I've been doing marriage ministry for almost 20 years, not as long as the other experts on the panel, but for a long time. And I still want to be a learner. Go to a marriage conference, listen to a podcast. We do one shameless plug. It's called More Than Roommates, and it's we want couples to be so much more than roommates. Learn from others. Kristen and I recently went through a 3-day marriage intensive together, where it was 2 counselors and Kristen and I in a room for 20 hours.
wow.
And it was awesome. And we came in not because like we're a 3 out of 10 or a 4 out of 10. We're doing great. But I'm like, how can we continue to grow and to learn? And instead of, somebody who pours into marriages all the time, I want to be poured into as well. So what does it look like to be humble, to bring others in, to admit you're not perfect? And I think where couples really struggle is we just get complacent and we stop growing and we stop learning. And then we either get divorced or we just coexist for the rest of our days. And I just think God has so much more for us than that.
It's something to keep in mind too is, we're talking a lot about talking to other people. A lot of times there's a difference between experts and teachers. Sometimes, the experts theoretically are the ones that have had the experience. So that's the couples that have been married a long time. But just because you have the experience doesn't mean you can actually really accurately articulate what makes the relationship work. I remember I was so excited about interviewing this couple at our church that had been married like 60 plus years. And I was like, I'm going to get so much gold. I'm going to be rich. And the best thing they could say was, well, divorce was just never an option. Murder, yes,
Yeah.
but not divorce. And that was funny the first time, but not the second and third time. And they really had nothing else to say. So what am I saying then? I'm saying in addition to talking to experts, the people that should know, but maybe not always be able to articulate it or have that vast, wide experience of what happens. This worked for them, but will it work for you? Well, maybe not. That's where you want to go to books. And great books like Love and Respect by Emerson Eggridge, Gary Thomas's Sacred Marriage, or Sacred Search if you're still dating and trying to figure out the magic. But reading books like that from people that are actually teachers that know how to, and I know other people on this, we have our own book too. We have our reading books from people that have been able to articulate clearly, this is what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. And you even suggested reading it together, or you could, one could do the audiobook and and then you can talk about it. And it gives you a common denominator there of something that you can start with instead of just going,
Yeah, and we still do that. And we just read a Gary Thomas book together recently. Yeah. So
it was on sex.
I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah. So you just keep doing it. You keep doing it. So
literally.
Sex or reading. Doing sex or reading.
Well, that too.
Yeah.
Both of the above.
All right. Amy, you have a wonderful family of origin inventory that helps people understand, how to model the healthy relationship. Could you tell us about that?
Yes.
I'm waiting for
I'm happy to walk you through that. And I just wanted to say, to add to what everybody's been saying, it is important for us who have been married a number of years to continue to build our own marriages, pour into our own marriages. Jim and I we've been married 40 years. And we just went to the New Art of Marriage last weekend, and it was so good. We have just continued to talk about just even new things that we have learned and how Scripture has been made even more alive in some key areas on how we are to serve each other and honor each other, which is important because a lot of older couples in their marriages like, we're good, we got this. And like, no, the research shows that most of you are probably pretty unhappy. And here's some opportunities to continue to invest in your marriage, because kids are watching. The younger generations are watching us. And so thinking about this legacy that we are going to be leaving, this family of origin reflection that we've created came about because of an activity I saw going on in my nonprofit center. It was called the Family Violence Project. And it just kind of freaked me out when I saw it. So why are we talking about family violence? And I know we need to have interventions for those families that have these crises going on, but can we flip the narrative, please, and talk about the good things about marriage and family and how people focus on that and work towards that, so that the violence isn't the thing that characterizes marriage and family, but a vision for hope and what could be. So this reflection that we have gives people an opportunity to look at key activities that they saw in their family growing up, and rate, did I see them often or not? How often did I see them? And if I didn't see them often, maybe that's something I want to add to my future family. So just not make these things a negative, because we are talking about having to forgive our families too, because we didn't know what we didn't know back then. Even Jim and I, we didn't know what we didn't know. Now that we know better, we know what to do. But taking those things that we observed and learned and flipping the narrative to create a visual of a tree with leaves that has growth on it. And you talked about growing early in this time together. Grow your future family based on what you want to be there, overlooking what wasn't there, fill in what could be there with creating a legacy and learning new skills, reading these books, and having a future family that flourishes and thrives. So it's a hands-on activity, which actually people really like to do because you get to doodle and color, and it takes the theory into practical hands-on and creates great conversations in the high schools, but also in our couples that are preparing for marriage or remarriage.
Yeah. And I really like in that family vision tree, because I've had the privilege of getting to do it. People identified like that inventory, where was a deficit, where, something you don't want to bring, to your new marriage together, and something you definitely want to do. You have actually two things, right? The family of origin inventory and the family vision tree. Can you share how they kind of fit together?
Sure. Well, you start with a reflection, do an inventory first of what did it look like. Sometimes seeing those statements in writing, how often did I see my parents go on a date night? How did we resolve conflict? Did we have family time together? Just rating that and giving it some scores. These are all examples of healthy behaviors that we ask people to think about. And if you saw those, good, great, you want to keep them, improve on them. But if you didn't see them, that's an opportunity for growth and a strategy, helping couples find strategies to implement those in their future families. So you do the reflection first, so you know where you've been, and then the tree second, so you know where you want to go. So it's kind of a two-part activity that go together very nicely, and I believe are really game changers, especially for couples who are getting married and have not even thought about it yet, or even teenagers. We do with 16-year-olds in the high school who are in health too. Sometimes they'll say, this is hard, I can't do this. Or sometimes they'll say, I can't do this, I don't have a dad, or I've never seen this, I'm not doing it. And I try to help them to see, just because you didn't see that modeled for you, this is where you flip that narrative to something you want to add to your future family. You don't have to repeat that. So you get to choose better than what you saw. And they get that. They get that there's hope and possibilities, even if it wasn't part of their past. It's not over. There's a hope for their future.
Oh, I just love that. And it was fun to do. And so for our viewers, I know there will be lots of ways and takeaways and links to how you guys can find that if you're interested in doing it yourself, or perhaps implementing it wherever you are.
Yep.
Scott, you have some really great insight too about in-laws as we go back to thinking about, how to separate from our family, and then how to treat others as we would like to be treated. What does it all look like to leave from your parents' authority structure and embrace commitment to your spouse?
Yeah, it is that, what does it look like to leave, that Genesis 2:24, leave and cleave. And sometimes we're way too enmeshed, as you said to MJ before, where we don't separate from the family, and that it's required if we're going to form this new family. But we don't leave behind our family; they're still a part of our lives. And I think in-laws and family can get such a really rough reputation that often is not warranted. It's like that perpetuating myth that you keep hearing, that the in-laws become the outlaws. And I think if you believe that, if you hear that and think it, then they actually can become that. And so, what would it look like to do things in a different way? And I know, that being said, there are some of us come from homes that have been abusive and unhealthy and toxic. And so that's a separate conversation in some ways. But for most of us, I think we just need to learn to treat our family and in-laws like human beings, like men and women made in the image and likeness of God. And so how do you want to be treated? You treat others the same way. Do you want to be shown, the fruit of the Spirit to yourself by others? Then you show those things to others. Do you want peace in relationships? Then you do. I think about Romans 12:18. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace, or live peaceably with others. And so what does it look like to fight for peace and unity in your family and with your in-laws? I think about like Ephesians 4:29, that there would be no unwholesome talk that comes out of our mouths, but we're only going to say things that are going to build others up and not tear them down. And what would our relationships look like with our in-laws and family of origin if we sought to build them up in every way instead of tearing them down? Life is really difficult. We need encouragement. And so, Hebrews 3:13, we encourage one another day by day, as long as it is called today, so that none of us are hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. And so what would our lives look like? What would our relationships look like if we just treated people with kindness, with empathy, with uplifting words? And that doesn't mean like you can't have hard conversations. It just means that you're doing everything you can to live at peace and to build others up and not tear them down. And so let's do that with, let's do that with our spouse, with our kids, with our community, as followers. If you're a follower of Christ, it's what we're called to do. And so do that as well with your family and with your in-laws. It would radically, you can't control what they do, but you can control the way that you speak and the way that you act towards them. That could build up relationships instead of tearing them down.
Well, and I like too, though, that when you talk about honoring your in-laws, that there is a point when you're not really called to obey them, to honor them. And MJ, you had some, personal experience with that about removing yourself from the enmeshment.
Yeah. And I think that what's important to remember in our culture today, the most loving word somebody can say to you is, I just want you to be happy. Every Hallmark movie has that terrible, terrible satanic lie, because I can't make her happy. I really can't. I just don't have control over all the algorithm, and certainly with my in-laws. So the goal is to serve. The goal is not to necessarily make them happy. The goal is to serve. It's a very different goal. When I'm serving somebody, I'm doing what's best for them. Especially, we all understand this from parenting. Those of us on this call, we've all parented. We're like, yeah, the goal isn't to make them happy. Sometimes they pretty much hate us. But a lot of times, if you're going to do what's right by your spouse, if you're going to do what's right by your in-laws, if you're going to do what's right by your own parents, you're going to be seeking to serve them, which is it may make them happy, it may not, but it's what's best.
Oh, well, Amy, Scott, Michael, and Julie, thank you so much for being here. We have had some great information.
Thank you for having us.
Very blessed to be on this.
Very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Well, viewers, what would our marriages look like if we thought about positive things we might want to keep from our family of origin, as well as a few habits that might be best left behind? And is there a place you can build community with other like-minded people who can help you strengthen your marriage? Viewers, thank you so much for joining us for National Marriage Week. Stay tuned. We're back every night this week through Valentine's Day. You can find answers to your questions and register for each night's discussion at marriageweek.org.